Reaching the final weeks of December, everyone is doing their ends of the year lists, and they're always fun to make, so I figured I'd jump right in and tell you guys about my top 25 favorite albums of 2025. The internet has been around long enough that I'm quite confident we all know how ends of the year lists work. That being said, before I get into my top 25 favorites of this year, I have a handful of honorable mentions that I just want to discuss briefly. First of the honorable mentions is going to be Pissgrave, Malignant Worthlessness, just a very eviscerating and raw approach to death metal that they've always been consistent since day one of doing that, and that's really it. Heavily inspired obviously by early Carcass, that if you're just looking for gritty, unrelenting death metal, Pissgrave has delivered time and time again. Haggis, Destination Extinction, one of the go-to names if you're trying to figure out what mincecore is all about. That being a melting pot of gore grind, grindcore, and other forms of hardcore punk bouncing off of each other. That this isn't really anything different from the other 50 releases they've done in the past, considering that they release albums on a nearly 3 months basis. It's really consistent and rapid how they release stuff. But overall, just a really fun, energetic album. That's really all it needs to be. Florence and the Machine, Everybody Scream. Always been a fan of Florence, and her approach to art pop has always been more grandiose and thematic compared to others. And I just find it impressive that she's now been active for, at least at this year, 20 years writing music, and she can still put out great material. And that's really all this album just is to my standards anyway, hence why it's only an honorable mention. But when it comes to art pop, I genuinely believe Florence and the Machines is one of the essentials for modern day pop artists to get into. Tithing, At the Mystery's End, a very newly formed neo-folk / dark folk project, whatever you want to call it, from Canada that isn't doing anything groundbreaking or new for this approach, but it has all the components I would want in it, as it's very lush, organic, and soothing to my standards, that I'm really curious to see where this project goes from here in the future. Kriegscore, The Womb of the World, very ominous, dark, brooding death metal from the United Kingdom. I've known about these guys for a handful of years after their first full-length album, but this follow-up right here, they take it even deeper and even harsher, I would say. Definitely for fans of Portal, maybe that's why I really enjoyed this album a bit more than their previous works. But yes, if you're looking for really just ominous, brooding, suffocating death metal, it gets delivered by this latest Kriegscore album. And the final honorable mention will go to Yahweh Nailgun, 45 Pounds. This is a very chaotic and sporadic form of noise rock and other forms of post-hardcore influences that I really enjoyed this album a lot, as not only is it chaotic, but also very rhythmic in terms of how the percussions are being played out. The only thing stopping it from being in the top 25 list is that it's a very short album. All of these songs only range around 90 seconds to 2 minutes at most, so when I was really getting integrated with some of the rhythmic patterns, it would just abruptly end. But this band is still really new, and I'm definitely going to keep a very close ear to the ground to see what they do next. With that all stated with the honorable mentions, let's finally get into the top 25 list at hand. Starting it off at number 25 is going to be Naked Whipper, Chapel Defilement. Sado Grind has returned from their previous album that was 30 years ago, that being Pain Streaks, a favorite of mine when it comes to this more bastille, ultra-barbaric approach to extreme metal, where Naked Whipper blends forms of black metal, death metal, and puts a little bit more emphasis on grindcore compared to its contemporaries like Blasphemy and Conqueror, that I've always felt like they're more of the party, fun, jam-out band of everything else similar to them. And I wanted to love this album. I wanted it to be just as good as Pain Streaks. And while I enjoyed it, I had a lot of fun with it. It's still very barbaric, and the vocals by Naked Whipper are still as ludicrous as they've ever been. It just doesn't cut as deep as Pain Streaks, where it let me down a little bit. So I wasn't necessarily disappointed with it, but it didn't live up to my expectations as much. But keep in mind, they've been out of the game for 3 decades, so had to be a little bit realistic here. But still very fun, very barbaric, and everything you would want with a band blending all of those extreme forms of metal together. Number 24, Street Sex, Dry Drunk. It's been 7 years since the last full-length album by Street Sex, that being The Kicking Mule, which let down a lot of people as all of the very abrasive, over-the-top noises and sounds was absent on that album for more of a grounded approach of industrial punk, I guess is what we can call them. But here with Dry Drunk, they've kind of returned to their roots, so to say, in terms of how their first album was and Position, where it's industrial punk with other forms of noise rock, really similar to a combination of Skinny Puppy meets Ministry meets Godflesh. What I've always found interesting about Street Sex, and they were able to do it on this album, is it sounds very similar to industrial punk and industrial metal like the bands I just named. However, it's not played in that approach because in terms of instrumentation, there's no guitars, there's no bass guitar, no acoustic percussions. It's all done with electronics and a synthesizer that I feel like metal and punk fans would absolutely fall in love with this album because instrumentally, it's different from those genres, but in terms of execution, it's very loud, very overblown, and just has such aggression added to it, but also very rhythmic at the same time. Songs on here like Entertainment Law, Eject Button, and Riding the Clock are great representations of that description. Number 23, Horror, Tomorrow We Escape. For those who are unaware, Horror is a two-piece New Jersey industrial rap, punk rap, horrorcore, whatever you want to call it, group that's been active for a little over a decade, and I've been aware of them ever since I started diving into more of the region of underground experimental forms of hip-hop, that I've always found them to be entertaining. Nothing that blew me away, but if I'm looking for just very overblown, obnoxious, abrasive hip-hop in that sense that would appeal to metal fans, because in terms of their songwriting, sound, image, and aesthetics, you'd have to be blind and deaf not to realize it. As for this latest album right here, Tomorrow We Escape, those components are still present as a lot of the beats and percussions are very overblown, a lot of distortion to them. The lyrical verses on here can have like this thrashing onslaught that's really aggressive. If you don't take my word for it, definitely check out the song on here, Target Practice. Then on top of it, they take their industrial hip-hop approach in all different directions by adding in all of these guest spots. The song on here, Tapeworm, they got Greg Pichotto, the vocalist of the Dillinger Escape Plan, to perform, and the song after that, Immortal, they got Chelsea Wolfe to be a guest spot on this album, which is really sick. Overall, if you're a fan of metal and hip-hop, and you don't mind those two worlds being blended together but in a tasteful way, definitely check this album out. Number 22, Deets, Never Exhale. These guys are a British post-punk group with a strong essence of noise rock embedded into their songwriting that I forget exactly how I came across this other than I let curiosity get the better of me, and I'm glad that I did because these guys have been a bit more active over the past recent years, so I definitely got a lot to catch up with them. But with this album, I wouldn't state it's anything particularly amazing other than it just reminds me of other bands that I enjoy. As a lot of the post-punk influence on here, it reminds me of something that Proto-Martyr would do, of both post-punk with a little bit of a garage rock influence. Whereas when it gets to the noise rock and dare I say even hardcore moments at points on this album, it reminds me of something I would listen to from like a Daughters album. Songs on here like Taxi Man, 4, and 18-Wheeler, all ranging around 4 to 3 minutes long, are just jam-out tracks that I always found myself head-bopping to it, regardless of what subgenre they lean on to more than the other at times on these tracks. Just if you want a jam-out post-punk album, definitely give this a listen. Number 21, Titan Blood, from the Visceral Abyss. I'm not the biggest fan of the whole Bastille war metal sound, as I do feel like for the most part it's quite oversaturated. Yet when it comes to Titan Blood, I've always found myself going back to them time and time again every time they release a full-length album. One of those reasons being that they don't overwhelm the listener with their discography. Every full-length album that they release, it's always, in a time lapse of at least 5 to 6 years. This being no different as their previous album was released in 2019. Add to the fact, I don't really feel like they're trying to be the most musically fastest or heaviest out of all of the Black Death bands out there, yet easily I would say they're one of the most terrifying, as their sound, production value, and overall execution is just so much more suffocating and cataclysmic compared to the rest of the herd. It feels like this monolith of just negativity being unleashed in the most barbaric ways possible musically is what Titan Blood has delivered time and time again ever since their debut full-length album Seven Chalices back in 2009. They've never really changed up this formula, and goddamn, this consistency has always just left me in awe. Add to the fact what makes this even more suffocating is just how lengthy the songs are, averaging roughly around 7 to 8 minutes long, with the closing track being well over 14 minutes long. It genuinely feels like it's meant to torment you with that barbarity. That overall, this album is definitely not for the faint of heart when it comes to extreme metal. Number 20, All Men Unto Me, Requiem. There's not much I can say with this album other than I randomly came across it a handful of months ago when I was purposely looking for neoclassical darkwave albums of 2025, and I came across this. I wouldn't necessarily say it's that specific subgenre, as there are neoclassical influences on here, yes, but in terms of darkwave, that's completely absent other than it's just a very dark sounding album. But what it is, it's very minimalistic in terms of the instrumentation, with the guitar, bass, percussions, and a pipe organ that during some of the parts on this album, at least when it gets like heavier per se with some of the distortion, it resembles some of the qualities you would find in doom metal. Kind of similar to how Chelsea Wolfe implements doom metal into her songwriting is what this reminds me of. But it's minimalistic. Vocally, it has this very vulnerable sounding type of singing with it that's both ethereal yet really dark and brooding, sounding like as if it belongs in this very tragic opera or this really haunting church choir is what the vocals remind me of. That I would say if you're a fan of Anna von Housewolf, but you want it even darker, more dismal, and more brooding, this will be right up your alley. Number 19, Cult of Fire, The One Who Is Made of Smoke. The Czechia black metal band Cult of Fire returns with their 5th full-length album, with their approach that's a mixture between something very atmospheric, ritualistic, spiritual, yet powerful, all at the same time. With their themes having to do with Hinduism, it's always made them stand out aesthetically from the rest of the horde of black metal bands out there. Even though I wouldn't say Cult of Fire is for the black metal purist per se, as they kind of deviate away from black metal at times in favor of some acoustic melodies and interludes or spoken word parts that really fleshes out the Hinduism themes that they present on their albums. It's just when it does come to the black metal portions, very melodic, very energetic, very fast-paced, and really puts a lot of emphasis on the climactic portions on their songs that I've just always found them to be insanely captivating, and they've always impressed me time and time again, and this being no different. Number 18, Lathe of Heaven, Aurora. Post-punk from Brooklyn, New York that I fell head over heels for with their debut full-length album from 2 years ago being Bound by Naked Skies. So much so that I put it as my album of the year for 2023. And with their follow-up full-length album right here, Aurora, they continue on that approach of post-punk with influences between The Killing Joke, Sisters of Mercy, and Fields of the Nephilim. It's just with their previous album, Bound by Naked Skies, they were leaning more heavily on the Killing Joke influences compared to Fields of the Nephilim and Sisters of Mercy. Yet with this album, Aurora, I feel like now they're leaning heavily on the Fields of the Nephilim influence more than the other two, as this album comes off a lot more ethereal and emotive. In terms of the vocals, there's not as much shouting going on this album compared to the previous album that resembles the qualities of Killing Joke. Instead, it's a bit more laid back and more of just straightforward singing that resembles the qualities, again, you would find in Fields of the Nephilim. The guitar melodies on here don't have that crunch compared to Bound by Naked Skies, as it's a bit more silky, smooth, and glides through everything that resembles more of the ethereal qualities, once again, you would find in Fields of the Nephilim. As if I haven't made it clear enough to begin with, but if you're a fan of Fields of the Nephilim, The Cult, Sisters of Mercy, and even Rosetta Stone, this will definitely appeal to you, because songs on here like Portrait of a Scorched Earth, Kaleidoscope, Oblivion, and Matrix of Control. All are great representations of those influences being implemented on this album, and I can't wait to see what these guys do next. Number 17, Hävikkärunu, Tavasland. Finland has always had a phenomenal black metal scene, and bands like Hävikkärunu make it known that that statement will continue on for decades to come, because man, this band does not miss. Their influences, they just wear it on their sleeves and they ride with it so hard, as the instrumentation is very pulverizing. So think of just, you know, blast beats and loads of tremolo pick guitars that resembles the qualities of Immortal, yet the songwriting and composition is very, you know, grandiose and heroic. That reminds me of something of like late era Bathory. It's funny though, because everyone I've talked to that are fans of Hävikkärunu state that this is their worst album, yet they all still highly enjoy this album. So that should tell you something about the quality of Hävikkärunu material. Regardless if you consider it their worst or their best, it's just great black metal that I feel like any and all fans of black metal would highly enjoy this. Number 16, Shearling, Motherfucker, I Am Both Amen and Hallelujah. Another album that I came across just randomly going through just related links on YouTube, that the album artwork definitely caught my attention, but the music really enticed me to listen to it from beginning to end, as it only contains one song, and this one song goes on for 62 minutes. As for a musical description for this album, it's like this really elongated experimental noise rock album that, in terms of the transitions, the pacing, the composition, I would argue what they made with this is a noise rock opera ballad, because there is a lot to digest with this album, as yeah, there are portions on it that resemble all of the components of noise rock with the very disorienting guitars, pummeling percussion, sour, distorted bass guitar, vocals that are a bunch of shouting that add to all the chaos. But then when that all ends, as, you know, rhythmic and awesome as it is, it turns into like these ambient droning noise sections that the vocalist, I believe his name is Alexander Kent, will just start yelling and screaming and wailing like he's having like a mental breakdown over it. That again, it's composed in the sense of something of an opera ballad, but just all of the unorthodox sounds of noise rock and drone and ambience scattered throughout it. That I know this is a really cliche comparison, but it's quite obvious here. It takes a lot of influence from bands like Swans. Overall for me, this album is an odyssey of noise rock sounds that it's not really something I'm going to be listening to a lot, as it takes a lot of my time to listen to. Again, it's 62 minutes long, but if you're looking for just a trip of an adventure, at least in the style of noise rock and drone and ambience, this will give you quite the journey. Number 15, Crippling Alcoholism, Camgirl. Another newly formed band that's been active for a handful of years. I discovered them last year with their previous album, With Love from a Padded Room, a mixture of gothic metal, gothic rock, post-punk, and elements of noise rock to some extent. That I thought it was a good album, but it really didn't win me over that much. However, with this follow-up album right here, Camgirl, they put way more emphasis on the gothic metal and gothic rock influences, really redefined their sound, and just overall this album is just such a bop. Songs on here like Mr. Sentimental, Pay Pigs, Bed Rot, and Screen Time are just really infectious, and how they overall sound as if they belong in this really grimy underground nightclub just really works with its charm and aesthetics. Along with the fact that roughly around a third of the songs on this album has a guest session vocalist, that being Luxury Skin, and her vocals are greatly appreciated as it adds a bit more variety and flair within the mix. But for my personal taste, the standout track on this album would easily go to the title song, Camgirl, as not only is it the longest song on here, clocking in at 7.5 minutes long, but it starts off with these really psychotic, pulverizing blast beats, the only time in the album I believe that they're executed, And it's just so much more violent and, again, psychotic from everything they would do before or after, and it just makes it stand out all the more. That one way I could describe it is think of it as a really hyper, faster, typo negative song is basically what that was. That showcases that metal being implemented in here just to create more of a violent and darker approach. Thoroughly enjoyed this album, and I can't wait to see what they'll do next, because their approach of this very abrasive, psychotic form of goth rock has definitely hit the right chords with me, and if they continue on with this approach, I can see them being a lot higher in future ends of the year lists. Number 14, Lady Gaga, Mayhem. Have always and will always be a fan of Lady Gaga, and while some albums are better than others, I was still heavily anticipating this release, and for the most part it delivered on all fronts, because basically what this album is, it feels like a time capsule of all different eras of her work, you know, kind of like meld together. Because for instance, you have the song Zombie Boy that has a really strong essence of like that disco dance pop that she would do, something on her like first album, The Fame. Or the song Abracadabra, where she does that just signature gibberish type of singing on some of the choruses that would remind me of something she would have done on the song like Bad Romance. Other tracks on here like How Bad Do You Want Me and Perfect Celebrity that have these really like overblown, powerful synth leads that reminds me of something she would have done on the album Art Pop. In some sense, you can say she's just catering to her fans with this album, which I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because in terms of songwriting and just her persona, she captures it again on this album and is just so entertaining. The only thing stopping this from going higher, because to be honest with you guys, out of all the albums I'll be talking about on this list, I've debatably listened to this album the most, but the thing that's stopping it from going into the top 10 or even the top 5 is, as much as I enjoy this album, the closing track on here, Die With A Smile, it has collaborative work with Bruno Mars, and I don't know what it is, but every time Lady Gaga does a collaborative song with a guy, I just absolutely loathe it. And this is no different, as I've never been a fan of Bruno Mars, and that song is just such a snooze fest compared to the rest of the album. It's the one big blemish that stops it from gaining into like the top 10. But besides the closing song, everything about this album I really, really enjoyed a lot. And it just showcases that now, I think, 15-ish plus years into her career, she's still putting out bangers. She's still, in my personal view, the queen, the black sheep, so to say, of all the pop star divas out there, and I can't wait to see what she'll do next, because I'm still convinced we've yet to hear the best from her. Number 13, Grenadier, Wolves of the Trench. I've always had a soft spot for melodic death metal, as death metal purists tend to view this niche little subgenre that it's very watered down, a weakened version of death metal that's oversaturated. Yet when it comes to bands like Grenadier with their approach, it will just knock people like that on their asses, because god damn, this album is riff city from start to finish. It does not let up on the throttle. There's so much melody going on with the riffs, but it's still as face melting as any other death metal band you can name. Even the random part towards like roughly the quarter-way portion of this album where there's some clean singing that almost sounds like power metal at times, it still doesn't let up on the intensity and velocity that you would get from the beginning of the album. It's just so good. And while yes, it's beyond obvious that in terms of their songwriting and sound, they're obviously inspired by Argus Lent, just without the really shitty lyrical themes and political views, I would say honestly, this album obliterates anything Argus Lent has done in decades, because there's just so much more passion being involved, there's so much more energy, and the songwriting is just leaps and bounds better. I personally feel like that for me, this is what I would consider to be the death metal album of 2025. Number 12, Diogen, The Graves and Ghosts of Yore. It's been a solid 5 years since their previous album, Endless Black Shadow of the Abyss, that I was convinced this band disbanded, as a lot of black metal bands tend to do a one and done type of release. But no, to my pleasant surprise, Diogen returned with a follow-up album. Now, it's labeled to be symphonic black metal that's a bit more raw and, you know, primitive sounding compared to all the other ultra polished black metal bands. And it's not just, you know, endless emperor worship that Diogen does. If anything, it resembles the qualities you would find from like something similar to Grausamkeit, where it has more of these neoclassical influences that are quite melancholic and triumphant. It's just what separates Diogen from Grausamkeit is the guitar riffs by Diogen are infinitely better. They're well written. There's some melody, some structure to it. It's not just this grainy noise that just rumbles in the background for 40 minutes. They are well composed. They are well thought out. And it's a rarity to come by nowadays, I feel like, as oversaturated as raw black metal is getting. Diogen is a diamond in the dust, I feel like, that I would strongly recommend checking these guys out if you just want well-written, raw black metal. Number 11, Clipping, Dead Channel Sky. Gotta call out my own personal bias here and state that I've been a fan of Clipping for almost 10 years at this point. They are a humongous reason as to why I have any fascination with hip-hop music to begin with, as it showcased me can be experimental and unorthodox. And with this latest album right here, Dead Channel Sky, Clipping has once again done another experimental album that kind of leans into the aesthetics and ideas of like a cyberpunk hip-hop album. By taking this approach, for the first time ever, Clipping has kind of given us this retro-flavored release that sounds like something that belonged in some 90s cybergenetic action movie. The first half of the album just has so much more urgency to it, especially on the percussions, as it has this flavor of drum and bass being played throughout it, along with Daveed Diggs' lyrical verses, like always, absolutely killer, and even he himself has some urgency and energy in terms of his rhythm flow and how he pronounces everything. And of course, all the wild noises and instrumentation you'll get from either Jonathan Snipes and William Hudson. Their work together in terms of just all the instruments and percussions by Clipping albums has always been great. And then here, it just comes off so much more action-packed that really complements the cyberpunk hip-hop approach they're going for. The second half of the album isn't as action-packed, as again, I do feel like they're trying to portray, in terms of concept anyway, some cybergenetic action movie. There's more interludes and it's a bit more disconjointed, but in terms of instrumentation, overall flow, I still feel like it fits with the rest of the album for what they're going for. And again, Clipping just always delivers by my personal standards, and this is just another stellar album by them. Number 10, Volan, Popov. Volan is one of the many bands a part of the Black Twilight Circle, but I think only roughly around 3 or 4 are still active with it. That being Volan, Arismenda, Blue Hummingbird on the left, and probably one other band that I'm forgetting. But the Black Twilight Circle discography, in terms of all the bands associated with it, is pretty prolific. And I know this is a really bold statement, but this Volan album is not only the best Volan album I've heard, it's honestly the best Black Twilight Circle album I've heard. I'm trying to say this in the most sincere way possible without it sounding like I'm overhyping it, but this album truly is monumental and every single note you're going to hear on it. It clocks in a little over 50 minutes long, and all the songs range at least roughly around 9 to 10 minutes long. So they're pretty lengthy, but every song feels like a journey to get through that doesn't overstay its welcome. Because yes, it has all the components of black metal, blast beats, tremolo pick guitars, wretched vocals. You know, you're all used to it. But just like the Cult of Fire album I talked about way earlier on in this video, where it bleeds out the cultural influences of like Hinduism, here with Volan, they're bleeding out the cultural influences of like the Mayan culture into here with a lot of folk and acoustic instrumentation that is really harmonizing but doesn't sacrifice any of the energy and power that you would hear from the black metal portions. Like, I truly mean this. This is honestly the best, or at least one of the best, Black Twilight Circle releases that they've done, and I don't know how they're going to top this. Number 9, Old Machines, The Cycles of Extinction. Guys, this is a Mass Effect themed black metal band, and what world can I not fall head over heels for this? This combines two of my favorite things into one. As I've been a fan of Mass Effect ever since I was a kid, I love that video game series. And obviously black metal is my preferred style of extreme metal, so this just goes hand in hand for me anyway, as niche as it is. But looking into the song titles, the lyrical themes, the album artwork, I just noticed all of the Mass Effect lore being embedded within it, and I was just nerding out about this album at every single point that I could. That being said, musically it's just as awesome, as it's symphonic black metal that clearly takes influence from Balsagoth, of these epic choirs, stringed arrangements, and orchestration that just takes you into a completely different world, that world being the Mass Effect universe. So if you're a fan of Mass Effect and black metal, as rare of a combination as that might be, you are going to absolutely love this as I did. Number 8, The Residents, Dr. Dark. Holy hell, how is this band still going? As The Residents have been around for, what, like 50 plus years, and they're still making music? From what I gathered, this is like their 30th or 35th full-length album. Like, oh boy, to say The Residents are prolific is an understatement. So going into this album, I wasn't really expecting them to blow me away or something that would be amazing, as I feel like they've kind of done everything that you could do. But nope, The Residents proved me wrong, because once again, The Residents make this really experimental piece of music like anything else that they've done. However, what's surprising about it, for my standards, is it's really dark, twisted, and dare I say, heavy at times. Like, I wouldn't say this is a metal album, but there are so many components about it that are adjacent to it. All the yelling and screaming on here is so psychotic, to the guitars on this that are down-tuned and have a little bit of groove to it. But all of the other string instrumentation of violins and cellos from all the guest musicians on here, it's done in this really psychotic classical sense that's dark and twisted, that I just can't help but relate it to like dark twisted sounds within like metal subgenres in some sense. Like, it just feels as if I'm trapped in this, you know, nightmare listening to this album where nothing makes sense. I'm really like out of my element in terms of like what I'm trying to recognize, yet I'm in awe at how something like this was manifested by a band. The Residents, it's just incredible that after 50 years of being active and releasing, at this point, hundreds of releases and dozens of full-length albums, they're still able to make music like this. It's really an incredible piece. And regardless if they continue on, because again, let's be realistic, they've been active for over 50 years, or this is their last full-length album, it's just genuinely impressive to me that they still have this amount of creativity. Number 7, Brain Bombs, Die. Another band that's been active for decades, but unlike The Residents, Brain Bombs tends to do the same thing over and over again, yet I can't seem to get sick of it. Their approach to noise rock is very raw and rhythmic, and that's really it. Like, there's nothing else to it other than some experimentation where they utilize like horned instruments for like a drony backdrop. But even then, that's nothing of like their main ingredient. It's just raw rhythmic noise rock with a little bit of a punk rock edge to it that I just can't seem to get sick of it. It's so infectious. I don't know what it is, but the moment I hear one riff by them, I just want to listen to the rest of the album. And that effect can be found on this latest album, Die, that it's simple, it's fun, I always bought my head to it, and I had to put it in my top 10. Number 6, Darkwood, Verloren Fate. German neo-folk that's very grounded and minimalistic, not having all these bells and whistles like other bands do to try to stand out. And maybe that has to do with the fact that I've always found so much more interest with Darkwood, because the vocalist and main songwriter for it, that being Hendrik Vogel, his voice is so soothing. Like, he somehow manages to make the German language sound comforting. But in terms of instrumentation, as I stated, very minimalistic. A majority of the songs are just going to be an acoustic guitar being strummed and singing, but towards some of the end portions of the songs, to some of the choruses, maybe an accordion's going to play, a violin, or a piano that just adds a little bit more weight for the end portions of these tracks. Again, very simplistic, very captivating, very emotive, and I've just found this to be a really comforting album in terms of just neo-folk, that sometimes less is more, and this is a great example of that. Number 5, Shishnenya, Angry Noises. So I was recommended this album by one of my Instagram friends, stating that it's one of the best albums that he heard and that he noticed I had a fascination with John Zorn and Peter Brötzmann. So it's in the style of free jazz. That being said, everything else about this album I was just in awe and wonder at, because my lord, this was the biggest surprise of 2025 for me. This is incredible stuff. It only contains, I believe, 4 songs, this particular album, and I believe 3 of the 4 songs are a little over 10 minutes long, pretty lengthy tracks, and I was just left in such wonder as to what was going to happen next. It transitions to all these wild instrumentations that just throw you around in all different directions as a free jazz would, but it's so hectic, so maddening, so heavy, and it's all done with jazz instrumentation. There's not even a guitar, like there's a bass guitar, but there's no like, you know, electric guitar, and it's just mesmerizing that this album sounds this heavy, this chaotic without one. It's really incredible stuff, and that's just only the tip of the iceberg, because what's even crazier about this album is everything you're going to hear on it, as precise, crisp, and clear as it is, was all performed live in front of an audience. So I can't even begin to fathom what it would be like to experience this music live. All I can say with this is give this album a shot if you want to go down a rabbit hole in terms of songwriting. It is a wild, wild ride that clearly this is a free jazz album geared toward metal fans. Number 4, Ramla, Hypervigilance. What was once one of the earliest formed power electronics groups in the early 80s has now transitioned to more of a noise rock, post-punk-ish kind of band over recent years that I feel like every era of this group is fascinating, but recently they've been really killing it. With this latest album, Hypervigilance, it's more in the region now of post-punk, noise rock, and forms of ambience and drone that, yes, I know this is another cliche comparison, similar to that to Swans. However, this album puts more concentration in terms of textures and soundscapes that it's another lengthy listen. I believe it clocks in a little over 70 minutes long if memory serves me right. And it's just like the best background music album of this year for me personally. It's something I was spinning a lot, just having something go on, but I found in a weird sense this juxtaposition between something really peaceful and full of solidarity, but also kind of haunting and bone-chilling when it starts to transition in between ambience and noise rock. There are other elements to this album, like psychedelic rock and post-punk being included when some of the vocals are utilized on it, but it's just a really soothing, chilling album. I don't know, it's doing both of those feelings for me personally at the same time, and maybe that's why I just find it so fascinating, why I just kept going towards it over and over again, and it had to make it into my top 25 list, and it just so happened to break into the top 5 because of this very unorthodox yet intriguing approach that they did. Number 3, Steroid, Chainmail Commandos. Without hesitation, I can state this unapologetically, this is the album I listened to the most this year. Good lord, the riffs, the melodies, the choruses, the singing, the percussions, everything about this album is so infectious, and every little verse got drilled into my head so easily that there's not really any standout song on here because they all stand shoulder to shoulder with one another. If you enjoy the opening riff of this album, I can bet like my whole collection you're going to enjoy the rest of it, because these riffs, man, they are just so incredibly infectious. It's played in the style known as egg punk with some types of heavy metal and traditional heavy metal influences that
How I described it by some people is think of Devo, but as a traditional heavy metal band is what this ends up sounding like. The only thing to point out here that might be a turnoff for some people, but for me personally, it fits like a puzzle piece with the overall melodies and songwriting here, is the vocals are very high pitched. I believe they use like a voice modulator because it sounds like Butters from South Park or the Minions singing on this album. It's not necessarily natural, but yet it's so upbeat and energetic. As I stated, it just fits like a puzzle piece in this album, and I just could not get sick of it. And as I stated, I've listened to this album the most of all 2025 releases, and that's a humongous reason as to why it ranked up so high for me. Number 2, Scimitar. Scimitarium. Oh boy, this album came so close to being my album of the year, as if we're just solely looking at guitar riffs, this is the best metal album of 2025. It is incredible to me how this guitarist sounds like at any portion of the album he is just shredding his heart out, whether it be the choruses to just some of the build-up parts of the songs to the outros. He's always sounding like he's shredding but still maintaining like a riff and groove that it sounds equivalent to that as if the guitarist captured lightning in a bottle. As over the top and extreme as the guitar riffs and just, I would honestly say even all the instrumentation, because even the percussions on here, they're played so fast with a lot of fast skank beats and even blast beats during some parts that you would think instrumentally this is equivalent to extreme metal, black metal, or death metal, but it's not. It's played really fast, but it's still in the essence of traditional heavy metal. And that being stated, I think what keeps it in that traditional heavy metal soundscape is the vocals, all done by a woman, have more of like this, occult rock type of execution and sound with it. Something similar to like, I don't know, The Devil's Blood or Coven, that it kind of keeps it just enough grounded to still be labeled as traditional heavy metal, but it still has the flair and extreme sounds of like a black metal album at times. I guess the best way I could summarize this album as to why I loved it so much is it sounds very extreme, but it's grounded enough to where you can follow along with all the instrumentation and all the vocals, that it really does feel like one of those albums where they captured lightning within a bottle. And coming in number 1, my album of the year, will go to Zykritius, La Grande Heresie. Oh dear lord, where to begin with this album other than it blew me away when I originally heard it at the beginning of this year, and it didn't budge an inch in terms of where I placed it on this album of the year list, as it's a Canadian one-man black metal project with elements of thrash metal for good measure that, even though it's from Canada, clearly it takes a lot of influence from the Hellenic black metal scene. So think of Greek black metal bands like Necromantia, Rotting Christ, Macabre Omen, and Verathorn. That it's those Teutonic-like guitar riffs that are very grand, triumphant, and full of valor that will just keep your attention span going, just glued to it from start to finish. And he's doing that on this album. However, he's adding in some bells and whistles on here. For example, the standout part on this album that I explicitly need to bring up is the solos, and not the guitar solo. The bass guitar solo on this is absolutely mesmerizing. How it can be that rhythmic, that chunky sounding, and fit with the hardest steel guitar riffs to the thunderous blast beats and the vicious and venomous sounds of the vocals being executed on this. This is an album that clearly takes a lot of influence from the past of black metal in one specific region and brings it forth for a present day audience, but doesn't feel out of place even though it's from a completely different region in this world. It really is just an incredible piece of music, regardless if you're an extreme metal fan or not. And I was just, again, floored each and every time I would re-listen to this album. And I would strongly recommend, if you're a fan of black metal, you're a fan of just vicious extreme metal, and obviously if you enjoy Hellenic black metal overall, give this a listen as soon as possible. And that'll do it for my end of the year list of 2025. Really curious to know what were some of your favorites of this year and what were some albums that you discovered from my list. Like always, links provided to everything I talked about will be in the description below. And a personal thank you to everyone who has watched this channel throughout the year. This year has been incredible for me in terms of growth and in terms of engagement. I can't thank you all enough for making 2025 the best year so far on my channel. And I look forward to seeing you all in the coming year of 2026 and further on from there. But like always, make sure you guys drink plenty of water to stay hydrated and have a great day.